Implementing ADDS Synchronization with Microsoft Azure AD. Now, Microsoft Azure AD, it is a cloud service. Microsoft Azure is a cloud service, and it do what? It provides the different cloud services, and in that there is a service which is for Active Directory. Like we create a local Active Directory for our own premises domain. We can also create the Azure Active Directory on the cloud, which is provided by the Microsoft. So for that we need to subscribe the services, and then we can use the Active Directory services of Azure also. It is a cloud Active Directory where we can use to authenticate the users, which you can use, which user can use the resources which is available again on the cloud. So we can authenticate and validate the users so that they can use resources from the cloud. Now we can do what? We can do synchronization with our local Active Directory, on-premises Active Directory, with the Azure Active Directory. So it is like extending the scope of Active Directory domain services. Active Directory domain services of our on-premises, we can extend the scope of that to the cloud. But limitation of ADDS is that it was designed primarily for on-premises deployment. So whatever the Active Directory, the Active Directory was designed only for the on-premises deployment. It was not meant for the cloud. That means single tenant by design and employs protocols not suited for internet communication and requires domain joined computers to deliver full functionality. So if you are joined to the domain, then you will get the full functionality of the domain Active Directory domain services. So because it was designed like that. Nowadays we have many more cloud services and many more cloud applications available. Previously, in old days, there was not like a cloud services was not there. So these Active Directory domain services was totally designed for the on-premises deployment. Now you can install ADDS domain controllers on Azure virtual machines. Now what we can do? Azure also provide virtualization, so we can create the virtual machine there, and on that virtual machine we can install the Active Directory domain services also, and we can configure it as a domain controller. So you can use the ADDS to provide authentication and authorization for cloud-based services and mobile devices by using the ADFS and web application proxy we can use. And we can use also Azure AD device registration, and also we can use the federation support, so that the users which is coming from the internet using the different devices, they can also use the resources from the on-premises by authenticating them through the Active Directory domain services. So we can configure ADFS with web application proxy, we can configure the Azure AD device registration, or we can also use the federation support. Now Azure AD as an authentication system, key difference between Azure AD and ADDS. So what is the key difference between on-premises Active Directory services and Azure Active Directory? First, Azure AD is designed for internet-based applications. That means it is designed for the authentication management for the internet-based applications. And in Azure AD, there are no OUs or GPUs. So under the Azure AD, we don't have any OUs. We can't create OUs. There is no OUs there, organizational units, and also there is no group policy or objects are there. Then Azure AD cannot be required through the LDAP. It is different. It is not required LDAP protocol. Then Azure AD does not use the Kerberos authentication also. It uses the internet-based authentication, a different authentication. Then Azure AD includes the federation services. It by default includes the federation services in this Azure AD. Then Azure AD authentication options. What are the authentication options we have? First, we have cloud identity. Cloud identity, where we have the Azure AD, and that it is independent cloud identity. That means there is a cloud, totally we configure the Azure AD on the cloud, and whatever the users we create on that Azure AD, that users will be used for the authentication. That will be completely independent cloud identity. We can do one more thing. We can use the Azure AD. We configure the Azure AD, and also we can configure our on-premises Active Directory domain services. And we can do what? We can synchronize between both the Azure AD and our on-premises Active Directory domain services. Here we give the single identity to both the users who is identifying under the Active Directory domain services. They will get the same ID, same identity, and they can use the same identity to access the Azure AD, the cloud services of Azure AD also. It enabling a same single sign-on experience with password hash synchronization. And also they can use the same password also to access the Azure AD applications, and also to access the domain Active Directory domain services in on-premises, in local network. They can use the same password, same identity, same username also. What we do, we use the Azure AD Connect software to synchronize the user's information from local on-premises Active Directory domain services to Azure Active Directory. Also, we can use the password synchronization, so that the same password they use locally, they can use the same password on Azure cloud. Then it is called synchronized identity. Then we can use the federated identity also. In a federated identity, what we can do, we can use the single federated identity, enabling the single sign-on in some scenarios, and additional flexibilities, where we can do what? We can use the Azure Active Directory Azure Active Directory Connect to synchronize the users information with the Azure AD of the on-premises users to Azure AD. And also we can use the federation, the Active Directory Federation services, or we can use the Azure Federation services to provide the single sign-on application or single sign-on scenarios with additional functionalities. So user can use the cloud applications, the on-premises users can use the Azure cloud applications with using the federation identity. They will use the single sign-on feature, and they can sign on to Azure Federation, and then what they can use these application resources or whatever cloud applications we have. Now, overview of directory synchronization, how it is synchronized with the Azure AD. Like we have the on-premises Active Directory domain services here, and we have the Azure Active Directory configured on the cloud, Azure cloud. So what we can do, we can synchronize between both these identity management. That means it is going to synchronize the LDAP identities, Exchange mail identities, database, and also HR database. Everything will be synchronized from local Active Directory domain services to the cloud Active Directory domain services. So planning directory synchronization. If we want to plan the directory synchronization, so best practice for deploying the directory synchronization is have a proper project plan first. Then if ADDS filtering is used, so configure it before synchronizing object to Azure AD, Azure Active Directory. Then work with a cloud service partner and perform the through capacity planning. Then remediate ADDS before deploying Active Directory synchronization. Then add all SMTP domains as verified domains before synchronizing with the Azure Active Directory. Then this is the prerequisites and preparation for directory synchronizations. So when reviewing the prerequisites for directory synchronization, your task should include capacity planning for your directory synchronization database server. So how much capacity, how much users and information you have and you want to synchronize. Then identify the hardware requirement for your directory synchronization computer, the computer which is going to do the synchronization. That must be you have to make sure that it is having a proper or required hardware support. Then identifying whether your environments exceed the Azure AD object quota. Sometime if suppose if these Azure AD is actually subscription based, so you will get based on the subscription you will get the number of users or number of resources you can use. There is a quota there. And now if you are synchronizing with this Azure AD, so maybe you are having more objects than the available quota on Azure AD. So you have to take care about that also, that you should not exceed the quota of Azure AD. Reviewing the network ports required by directory synchronization, and also determining if any schema extension to ADDS are required. That means we extend the Active Directory schema to add some more applications or softwares. So sometimes, like for example, we are adding SQL, Microsoft SQL services, or we are adding Microsoft Exchange services. So we have to exchange the schema. So if any case, if you're planning for that, then you should determine before synchronizing with Azure AD. Configuring a tenant for directory synchronization. So to enable the Active Directory synchronization by using the Azure portal, from the Azure portal, in the left pane navigation pane, click the all items and then click your Azure AD instance. So first you have to have the subscription for the Azure Active Directory, and then you can go on to log into the Azure AD portal. On that portal you log into the portal, and then on the left side, all items, you will see all item. There you will click the Azure AD instance. It will open the Azure Active Directory instance. Then on the toolbar, click the directory integration, and under the integration with local Active Directory, click active. This will do what? It will activate the directory synchronization by use from the Azure AD portal. So this is the Azure AD platform. This is a portal. So here, this is a URL. You can see the portal.azure.com, and here you have different tools. First, you have to subscribe, and Azure AD, you can go on to select here in the left side, and here you have multiple different tools, all items, all resources, and under that you have Azure Active Directory also. So you can click on this, and it will open the Azure Active Directory instance. And here you can see this is the Azure Active Directory instance where you can configure and manage your Azure Active Directory. You can create users, groups, you can have roles and administrative units. There are lots of things are here, and in that you have Azure AD Connect also. So when you click the Azure AD Connect, you can do what? You can enable or synchronize with the local on-premises Azure Active Directory. So I will click here. It will take a lot of time depending on our network. There are lots of other things here, but if you are purchased, this is not the purchase version, it is only the preview, so it is not opening that Azure AD synchronization. If I go to users, you can see here I cannot add new user because this page includes the preview available for your evolution. This is only the preview version, so I am not able to add any object here. So I am not able to enable the Azure AD synchronization also because it is only a preview version. But you have to purchase this, and when you are you subscribe, then you can do all these things. So this is the portal, online portal, where you have to go first to enable the Active Directory synchronization, and also from here you can download the Azure AD Connect software, which we can use to do the synchronization from our Azure Active Directory services, our local Active Directory domain services. So from there we can use the software to configure the synchronization between this online Azure AD and our local Azure Active Directory services. Then ADFS, Azure Active Directory Federation Services, and Azure AD, how it works. This is the following steps. This describes the process of signing into a browser-based software as a service application that is integrated with the Azure AD when using the ADFS. So how it works, that means this is our single sign-on application. This is the SaaS application, that means software as a service we are getting from the online Azure cloud, and what we are using the Azure AD authentication for this application. We are using this for the application, and also we are using the ADFS Federation services for our local authentication in the domain controller. So how it works, first this client computer do what? It wants to use this application, so it sends a request to this application. Now application says that it is going to authenticate based on Azure Active Directory. So it will send the request to Azure Active Directory services. Now Azure Active Directory Services says that okay, this is Federation Trust we have configured, so it will send the request, it will send the reply to authenticate from the ADFS Federation Services. Then the user sends the request to the ADFS Federation Services, and then it will try to authenticate it from the domain controller, and if it is authenticated, the user is authenticated, then it will send the reply to ADFS, and ADFS send the reply to the to the client that you are authenticated, it is given the ticket token, and then it will the user client machine will send the token to Azure AD to validate. Now Azure AD will be validated that user, and Azure AD will send the request or reply. It will send the token to access the application. Now the client can access the application. It will send the request to the application, and then it will get the application. Now implementing the directory synchronization by using the Azure AD Connect. Azure AD Connect is a software which we can download it from the Azure portal, or we can download it from Microsoft also freely. It is available freely. We can download it from Microsoft. It is a small software and which we can use to configure the synchronization between our local Active Directory and Azure Active Directory. So when you use Azure AD Connect for directory synchronization, when new user groups and contact objects in on-premises ADDS are added to Azure AD. So if suppose the same user accounts or same groups or same contacts or same objects we create in our local Active Directory services, we want to add that into the same into the Azure Active Directory. If we don't do the synchronization, then what we have to do? We have to do manually. That means we have to create the same account here on the local Active Directory. Then we have to create the same account on Azure AD also. But those accounts will be separated. Those accounts will not be synchronized. So anything we do changes here in local Active Directory, it is not updating on Azure AD, and whatever we change on Azure AD, it is not going to update on local Active Directory. But if we want to synchronize, then we have to configure the synchronization by using the Azure AD Connect. Then attributes of existing user groups or contact objects that are modified in on-premises ADDS are modified in Azure AD also. Existing users group and contact objects that are deleted from on-premises ADDS are also deleted from Azure AD. So we don't have to delete two times, from local and from Azure AD. Then existing users objects that are disabled on premises are also disabled in the Azure AD, because we do the synchronization between both the ADs. Now Azure AD Connect requirements. When you identify the Azure AD Connect requirements, you should review that Azure AD requirements, what Azure Active Directory requirements are, then domain and forest requirements, then operating system and supporting software requirements, the machine which we are using to synchronize. We have to check the operating system and supporting software requirements. Then on-premises and account database requirements we have to make sure before configuring the synchronization. Azure AD Connect Express Synchronization. Express synchronization, that means when we use the configuration, when we use the software, it will ask you to configure custom, or you can use the express setting. So scenario for using the express setting, when when you have a single ADDS forest, so you can go for the express setting. If you have multiple ADDS forests created, then you have to go for the custom. Then users sign in with the same password by using the password synchronization. And then also, if we want that user should use the same password for on-premises Active Directory domain services, and also the same password we want to use for the Azure AD. So we can go for the express setting. In express setting, it is added that password synchronization is also there. Now installing Azure AD Connect with express setting. So install the synchronization engine first. First we have to install the software, then configure the Azure AD connector, then configure the on-premises ADDS connector. That means first we have to configure it from the Azure Active Directory on the cloud portal, and then we configure it from the on-premises Active Directory domain controller connector server. Like we can use it, we can configure it on Active Directory server, or we can configure a separate server for the synchronization. It will be called ADDS connector. Then enable the password synchronization, configure the synchronization services, configure the sync service for Exchange hybrid deployment. It is optional if we have the Exchange services. then enable the automatic update for Azure AD Connect. So it will automatically update the Azure AD Connect software also. Azure AD Connect customize synchronization. Now you can select the customized settings for the following scenarios. When you have a multiple forest, then when you synchronize your sign-in options such as ADFS for federation or use a non-Microsoft identity provider. Then when you customize the synchronization features such as filtering and write back also. So if you want to customize these options, then we can go for the custom settings. Now how we can install and how we can configure this Azure AD Connect. First, what you have to do, you have to configure for configuring and installing the Azure AD Connect. First, you have to log into the portal, Azure portal. Go to Active Directory from this side. Then from here, click on the Azure AD. From here, you select the Azure AD Connect and click to download the Azure AD Connect. So when you select the Azure AD Connect, it will say you want to download. You have a download option here. So you can download it from here, or otherwise you can directly go to download center of Microsoft and you can download the Azure AD Connect. And after downloading it, what you will do, you will go for the after enabling here from the Azure AD, you have these password synchronization options available here where you can enable it. Then when you go on to install it in your local Active Directory services. So the software Azure AD Connect, we have to install it into our local Active Directory domain services server or other member server which we want to use it as a synchronized server. So we configure, we install it on that, and then after installation it will open this widget where you will it will say welcome to the Azure AD Connect, and you have to note these things, and then after it you will agree and you will go on to next. Now here it will ask for the express setting or you want customized setting. So express setting we use when we have a single forest and we want to synchronize password and all other settings, or we can choose custom if you want to do it manually. So you can select the custom setting also. Mostly we select express setting is enough for us, so use it. And then after that, the next step is to connect the Azure AD. Here you have to enter your Azure AD Global Administrator credentials and click next. This account is only needed for configuring Azure AD Connect. So this account you have to give your account of your Azure AD. So the Azure AD account you have to mention here, and account will go like this, like username at your domain name, your Azure domain name, then dot on Microsoft.com. This will be the same. So this will be the account of your Azure AD. Now after giving the username and password for the Azure AD, in the next step we have to provide the authenticated user for our local Active Directory domain services. And this is our local Active Directory domain services administrator who is responsible. We have given the right to synchronize the information to the Azure AD. Then after that, you have to select the sign-on configuration here. Like if you see the Azure AD sign-in configuration page, that is this page. That means review and any domain not listed, verified, and verify it in Azure AD before continuing. So if it is saying your domain is not verified here in the Azure AD domain, then first you have to verify it. That means user will not be able to sign into Azure AD with on-premises credential if the UPN suffix does not match a verified domain. So you have to verify it in the Azure AD. So once you have verified your domain, click the refresh button, refresh icon here. So status should be changed to verified. Alternatively, you can check the box continue without matching all UPN suffix to verified domain. You can also select this checkbox that without verifying you want to continue. This will allow you to continue to Azure AD Connect Wizard, but however you will need to complete the verification process before user can log into Azure AD. So you have to first verify this domain. You have to configure it on your Azure AD portal, and then it will be verified here. And we can go without verifying, but it will not allow the users to log in. So we have to verify it first. We can do it later, but we have to do it. Then in the next step, we have verified the domain. So checkbox for the start synchronization process when configure completes, otherwise uncheck the box and click install. This means what? This checkbox, we want to start the initial synchronization. So it will start as soon as we install the application, install the Azure AD, it will start its synchronization. If you don't want to do this right now, then you uncheck this and you do it manually after the installation. So if you uncheck the box, sync will be configured but won't run until you run the Azure AD Connect wizard again. So after this, you select install, and after the installation it will say it is complete configurations. Any errors or action item will be listed in the configuration complete page. Click exit to complete this setup. So any error or information comes, if you see, you will see it here, and then you can close. Like configuring is complete. You can now log into Azure or Office 365 portal to verify that the user accounts from your local directory have been created. Now once you have synchronized this, then what? The users which we created on Azure, our local Active Directory, will appear on the Azure AD. And also it says here the Active Directory recycle bin is not enabled. This is also a requirement, like you should enable the Azure our local Active Directory recycle bin in our local on-premises Active Directory domain services. So we have to enable the recycle bin feature here in our domain services. It is strongly recommended. It is not enabled in this case, so it is saying that you should enable it first. Then it is saying also one more thing, that Azure AD Active Directory is configured to use the AD attribute like my MSDS consistency guide and as the source anchor attribute, which is just an information. So all these are just an information, no error. So you can go on to exit. Now your synchronization is configured. And you can see, you can go to the portal for Azure AD in your domain. You can see here, you can see the users which we created on our local Active Directory. This is the Azure Active Directory object which is directly created on Azure AD. Like you can see the name. This is the name which we have used to configure the synchronization. This is the account we used to configure the Azure AD synchronization. And this is the accounts which is synchronized from our local Active Directory. So from local Active Directory, it is synchronized to this Azure AD. So this is how we can do what? We can configure the Azure AD and configure the synchronization. Then Azure AD Connect monitoring features. We have the monitoring feature for the Azure AD Connect. So in Azure AD Connect, after installation, we get the monitoring feature also, where we can do what? On-premises ADDS and ADFS servers here that will be connected to the Azure AD, and Azure AD Connect Health. We can check that what is the health and how the synchronization is going. Is it any error or anything? We can see it here under the Azure AD Connect Health feature. This is available in the Azure portal, Azure Active Directory portal, where you can see the Azure AD Health also. Then Azure AD Privilege Identity Management. Here you can manage the Azure AD Privilege Identity, which allows you to discover which users are the Azure AD administrators and enable on-demand just-in-time administrative access to directory resources, get reports about the administrator access history and the changes in administrator assignments, get alerts about access to a privilege role. So it is available in Azure AD portal. Then now managing identity with the directory synchronization, like when we synchronize the directory, so how we can manage the identities like users and groups. So comparing options for identity synchronization. Now when we configure the synchronization, so we sync user groups and contacts with Azure AD. Now this is for the directory synchronizations, it is supported. For directory synchronization with password synchronization, with the password it is also supported, and directory synchronization with single sign-on, like for federation. So it is also, Azure Federation is also supported to synchronize the user groups and contacts. Now synchronize incremental updates with Azure. It is also available in all these three things. That means incremental updates, whatever we have changed in these users groups information, that will be updated to Azure AD. Enable hybrid Office 365 scenario. Now the identity which we use to synchronize with AD, we can use those identity to access the Office 365 product also. So it is supported hybrid, yes, and which is limited support. For the limited support for the password synchronization also, but if we are using the single sign-on option, then it will give you the full support. Users can sign in with the on-premises credentials. That means the same password which they use for the local synchronization, local Active Directory domain services, they can use on the Azure Active Directory synchronization also. Now, if only we synchronize the directory services, then the password will not be synchronized, so you cannot use the same password. User cannot use the same password. But when we synchronize the directory and password both, then the user can use the same password of local Active Directory to the domain services. And the same for the single sign-on services also. Reduce the password administration cost. In this, because we are not synchronizing the password, there is no cost. But because we are synchronizing the password also, then we have this reduced cost here. We have also the reduced cost here. Control password policies from an on-premises directory. That means on-premises directory, when we configure the password policies, so it will not apply when we only synchronize the directory. If we synchronize the passwords also, then it will also apply the policies for both. Then enable the cloud-based MFA. It is available for everything like only directory synchronization or password synchronization or single sign-on. Enable on-premises MFA. It is not supported when we only synchronize the password and all that. It is only available when we have the synchronized sign-on, single sign-on services, federation services. Authenticate against on-premises directory. So for authenticating against the on-premises directories, it is not authenticate when we do synchronize the directory and password. It is only available in single sign-on federation services. Implement the single sign-on with organizational credentials. It is available only when we do the single sign-on federation services synchronization. Customize the sign-in page. This is also when we do the synchronization for single sign-on federation services. That means we have a federation services, also we synchronize it with the Active Directory federation services, Azure services, Azure federation services. So limited access to services based on the location or client type. We can we limit the resources? We cannot when we only do the synchronization for users directory informations and password information. We can do that when we have the synchronization for the single sign-on federation services. So this is the comparison. When managing the users with the directory synchronization, where we are only synchronizing the directory information. So after you deploy the Azure AD Connect successfully and enable the schedule synchronization, perform these required management tasks to ensure your users synchronize efficiently. So in that we have the option to configure the user write back. Write back, that means when we change something on Active Directory, local Active Directory, so it is going to write to Azure Active Directory. Changes will be write to Azure Active Directory, and when something we change on Azure Active Directory, then it should be also write back to our local Active Directory. Then also this is for the user information write back. We can also configure for the password write back. That means if you change the password on Azure AD, then it should also be write back to our on-premises. We can also use for the device write back, for the device authentication, primary SMTP address management, the address for the SMTP mail services. We should manage the primary address management, like the main primary address we use for both AD and Azure Active Directory. Recovery from credential deletes. So if suppose the credentials are deletes, then we should have to be a recovery, like recycle bin we should have. Recovery from unsynchronized deletes, that means If suppose unsynchronized deletes happens, then also we should recover it, and we can do that by using the recycle bin feature of Active Directory. Accidental account deletion. We can tick there is a tick box when we create the user account. We have a check box there to prevent it from accidental delete. Bulk activation of new accounts. So when we create the new accounts, we can have an option to create the new account in bulks and activate the new accounts in bulks. Managing groups with the directory synchronization. So the group write back feature writes group from Azure AD to on-premises ADs. That means when you create any group in the Azure Active Directory, then that will also be write back to our on-premises local Active Directory domain services. The command let initialize AD sync group write back prepare ADDS automatically for group write back. So if we want to prepare our local Active Directory domain services, then we can use this command, PowerShell command, and it will prepare our local Active Directory domain services automatically for group write back. Then group name OU. Group OU is the OU where the cloud groups are stored in on-premises ADDS. So in on-premises ADDS, this is where the OU this is the OU where the cloud groups are stored. Then groups from Azure AD are represented as distribution group in on-premises ADDS. We have two types of groups in ADDS, security and distribution group, but the group which is created on Azure AD and when they are write back to our local on-premises ADDS, it will be as a distribution group. Then an Azure AD premium license is required if you enable a group write back without the Exchange Server hybrid write back feature. So if you want this feature, then you need to subscribe for the Azure AD premium license. Then modifying directory synchronization. Filtering configuration type that you apply to Azure AD Connect include domain, OU and attributes. So domain means enable you to select which ADDS domains are allowed to synchronize with Azure AD. If you have multiple domains in the forest, then uses the Azure AD Connect or synchronization service manager. Then OUs enables you to select which OUs in ADDS are allowed to synchronize to Azure AD. Uses Azure AD Connect or synchronization service manager. So after configuring this Azure AD, you can do these things. These options are available in Azure AD. Attributes also we can synchronize, which enables you to control which objects in ADDS should synchronize to the Azure AD based on the criteria of the object's attributes. We can configure the criteria of the attributes, also filter that this attribute users or object should be synchronized, which is we can uses the synchronization rules editor. So we can do it by using the synchronization rules editor. We can configure the attribute, which attribute we want to synchronize. Monitoring directory synchronization. We have different tools to monitor the directory synchronization like Operation Manager. This use the System Center Management Pack for Azure. So this is we have to use the System Center Management Pack for that. We can use the Azure Classic Portal. We can monitor this from Azure Classic Portal. We can also use the Windows PowerShell commands. We can also use for on-premises server, we can use the Synchronize Service Manager tool. We can also use event logs to monitor the synchronization, how the synchronization is working, is any error is coming or not. Then troubleshooting directory synchronization, if something goes wrong, if it is not working properly. So how we can do the troubleshooting? There is a task for the troubleshooting like synchronization include analyze the logs for error first. First analyze the logs, what is the error, then remediating synchronization errors with the tools like typically issues that can lead to problem include installation errors such as using incorrect on-premises or Azure AD credentials. If suppose we have used the wrong credentials, then inadvertently deactivating directory synchronization in Azure Classic Portal or through the Windows PowerShell. Or mistakenly suppose you go to the portal of Azure AD and you disable the synchronization. So it can also lead to the disable or error in synchronization. Or from PowerShell you mistakenly run some command which disable the synchronization. Unexpected changes in ADDS that affect the OU scoping or attribute filtering. Suppose you changes something in your local ADDS servers, local Active Directory domain services, which can affect the filtering feature. Like you have configured the filtering for the attributes, that this attribute should be synchronized, and then you suddenly changes something that affect that attributes. Corrupted ADDS requiring directory recovery. Now if you have corrupted ADDS, that requires the recovery for our Active Directory services. So this is our Azure AD. This is our topic. We have seen like Azure AD synchronization, what is Azure Active Directory, and what is our how we can synchronize the Azure Active Directory with our local Active Directory. It is only like we want to use the same user credentials for our local Active Directory, and also we want to use the same resources, same user or identities to access the cloud services. We can configure the synchronization between our local Active Directory with the Azure Active Directory by installing the Azure AD Connect software and configuring the Azure AD Connect software. So this is what the Azure AD synchronization with our local Active Directory services.